Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about resilience during this time of coronavirus, and I think that this time of going through coronavirus actually gives us an opportunity to develop our resilience. It's something that's unusual. It's something that we didn't expect, but now that we're stuck in the middle of it, it's a great opportunity to work out what we're made of. You know, what we're able to tolerate. How we resolve problems, etc., etc. So I think that now is a great time to talk about resilience and potentially look at ways that we can enhance our own resilience, or maybe for some of us just find out what resilience really is. So today I'm going to talk about in this presentation the difference between resilience and mental toughness. This is an ongoing debate within the performance or sports psychology realm. I'm going to talk specifically about resilience today, and then therefore talk about characteristics of resilience and what it is. So I think it's important to have a look at what resilience actually is before we start talking about how we develop it or what are the characteristics of resilience. So as Dr. Andrew Schatt says, the research shows that more than education, more than experience, more than training, it is resilience that determines who succeeds and who fails. And so looking at resilience specifically, it's the ability of an individual to bounce back from adversity. So adversities can be multiple different things. It might include significant setbacks, it might be hurdles, it might be challenges, it might be roadblocks. We can look at a couple of those things, what we might look at that present themselves in our life that we might have to bounce back from. So we're talking about injuries, burnout, bad traffic, a failure at something, not doing well in a test as an example. School, work, study might all present issues of failure that we might need to bounce back from. Sleep difficulties might present opportunities that we need to be resilient. Isolation, which is something that we're all experiencing at the moment with our coronavirus shut-in. Illness, pain, relationship difficulties, any other setbacks that come up in our life, financial difficulties, anxiety, social difficulties. These are all things that we can show resilience to and bounce back from in our lives. And so when we're talking about resilience, we're trying to, using the metaphor of a rubber band is something that we might look at to try to understand what it is. We see this rubber band is being stretched to its limits. It's really under pressure, it's under a lot of strain, but, once those fingers come off of it, the rubber band returns back to the way it was beforehand, not affected. It's bounced back, it's come back to where it started. And that's kind of the metaphor that we use for resilience. No matter what strain it goes through, it comes back and it comes back as the way it originally was. So to look at resilience, there's this ongoing argument within sports psychology, what is mental toughness? What is resilience? Are they the same thing? Are they different? I personally tend to think of them as two separate things, and I tend to try to. I've sort of got my way and what I've seen in the research and the literature that I look at to sort of delineate between the two of them. So, mental toughness is the natural or developed psychological edge that enables you to be consistent in remaining determined, focused, and confident and in control under pressure whilst coping with what life throws at us. So I tend to look at mental toughness in this way. There's an argument that perhaps we are born with mental toughness, and therefore there's no ability to develop it. But I think that's a bit bunk, to be honest with you. I think that we all have the ability to develop things even if we're not born with them in our lifetime. So that's what mental toughness is. And just to clarify, this is the way I tend to look at the difference between resilience and mental toughness, is that resilience is about bouncing back from adversity, and mental toughness is about keeping on going through adversity. So we might think about, picking yourself up from a loss on one weekend to play as well as we possibly can the following weekend. That would probably be resilience, whereas mental toughness is the ability to push through in a triathlon or in a marathon, for example, to keep going in the face of adversity. And now we look at this idea of resilience enhanced. So if we look at resilience as being about bouncing back from adversity. What if we bounce back better? Don't just bounce back better than what we were before. Bounce forward. So yeah, don't just come back better than you were before. I mean, the same as you were before, bounce back better than you were before. These are some ideas around resilience. So the question remains, can we develop resilience, or is it something that's innate within us? The research remains mixed as to what characterizes resilience to start with, but I remain convinced that we can all develop resilience. And hopefully when I look into the characteristics that I'm about to talk about, hopefully you will see that these are things that we can develop over time. So research into resilience tends to focus on a mixture of the following characteristics in regard to what resilience actually is. So we're going to look at all 8 of these characteristics on the following slides, and hopefully you'll see that these are things that, even if these are things that we can develop, or even if they're characteristics that we already possess in ourselves, we can enhance them to be even better at them, I believe. So the first characteristic of resilience is around emotional regulation. So we're keeping our feelings in check so we can remain task and goal focused. You know, what is keeping our eye on the prize is what we're talking about here. So the perception that something is stressful acts on emotions in significant ways, and it can influence our behavior. So if we're trying to achieve something and we're just getting so emotional about it that we can't continue in the direction of our goals, then, you know, we're not being very resilient. So the idea is, no matter what's thrown at us, is be able to control our emotions, to regulate our emotions so that we can stay in the fight. I mean, we see athletes that choke. We see athletes that get the yips. I mean, these are high level stress situations that they weren't able to regulate their emotion down. So we need to be able to keep our emotions in check to be resilient. So it's easy, however, to be unaware of the impact of stress on our emotions and our behavior. So having some self-awareness is really, really important when it comes to emotion regulation. I have done another slide on managing anxiety, so I won't go into that too much today, but we will just be aware that stress and anxiety can have an enormous impact on our ability to achieve what it is that we're trying to achieve in life. The most important emotional skill of resilience is emotional self-awareness. And remember, emotions are information. Just because we have an emotion doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that we have to react to it. It doesn't mean that we have to be a slave to that emotion. You know, emotions are just information. Anxiety is information. And we might say that anxiety is telling us, if we're experiencing anxiety, we might say that something important is about to happen. So that doesn't make it a negative thing or a positive thing. It's just that something important is about to happen. So we can accept that anxiety, if we can accept that anxiety is inevitable and facilitated for performance, we might accept anxiety a little bit more. We might accept the emotions that come to us as long as they don't get overawed us. And if we want to understand how emotions are something that are important, we can look at the inverted U hypothesis of anxiety or arousal and performance. So all those that heard the word arousal and had a chuckle, get your mind out of the gutter. What we're talking about here is activation or energy in our body. If we look at this, we can see that with low arousal or low activation, we have poor performance. And often, if I'm giving this presentation in the crowd, we'll say, well, what state do you think we're in when we have low arousal and very low performance? You're right, a coma or asleep or unconscious of some description. But what we see is we actually need to have some arousal, some activation up to that moderate level where we have our highest level of performance. And we call that the zone of optimal performance. And then when we see that our arousal, our activation or our energy starts to get higher to that over aroused level, we start to have poor performance. And that's where we look at the yips or choking in sport, which is where the anxiety has gone so far that our performance starts to come down the other side. In fact, we might actually fall right off a cliff, and our ability to be able to maintain, now that's anxiety. When we start coming down that curve in the high arousal, that's anxiety. That's the pure definition of anxiety. But if we can regulate our emotions to stay more in that maximal performance area, that zone of optimal performance, that's where we're going to get the best out of ourselves. So moving on from emotion regulation, we start to look at impulse control. So impulse control is about keeping behaviors in check, so once again, we can remain goal focused. So the key is to build self-awareness. What emotions am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? What does my emotional reaction tell me? Is what I'm thinking reasonable? Is what I'm thinking helpful or useful to my performance and state of mind? And if the answer to any of those questions is in the negative, then we need to try to change it. So resilient thinking, focusing on finding solutions to problems. So our impulse might be, when trouble comes, it might be to run away, fight, flight, or freeze. So we want to try to, if we're doing any of those things, we might not actually be able to stay goal focused and therefore be resilient in a given situation. So the more we can be aware of our feelings and see that these feelings are starting to lead to impulses that might lead us to do something that is not goal focused or takes us away from the goal we're trying to achieve, then we can put something in place to stop it. And of course, our impulse might be to run away or do something to the problem, whereas sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. Might be to wait it out, might be to wait for this feeling, wait for this anxiety to pass. And another thing that helps us to be resilient is having a positive causal analysis. So this comes from the concept of attribution theory. So causal analysis is accurately and comprehensively locating the cause of adversity and coming up with solutions for what can be solved. So if we're in a situation where, for example, that we attribute the problems to someone else when it's actually us, then how do we be resilient? How do we solve the problem if we're always making it somebody else's fault? Maybe it's something that we have control over and we need to do something about. Conversely, there are some of us that blame ourselves for everything when it might not be our fault. And that can take us away from our goal focus as well. So accurately identifying where the cause of the issue is and then doing something to solve that problem is something that is really important to resilient thinking. So, and if a solution cannot be found or a situation cannot be resolved, then the ability to accept it and move on, the ability to control what can be controlled and let go of what can't, is a very strong attribute in those that are highly resilient. So, and it's about early threat detection as well, as where is the problem coming from and doing something about that problem, whether it is to avoid it or to do something to it directly, is something that people that are resilient that definitely bring into their lives. So accurately and comprehensively locating where the problem is coming from and doing something about it. So the other thing that people that are highly resilient tend to display is self-belief and self-efficacy. So your belief in yourself that you have mastery in the world and the belief that you have the capability to perform a particular task. So I get given a task to perform, or there's something that I set for myself. Having a belief that I can actually do it is extremely important. People with high levels of self-belief believe they will succeed and are therefore likely to persevere and persist when faced with adversity. If we don't believe that we're able to achieve something in particular, then we're more likely to give up. What's the point of doing something that I know I'm not going to be able to achieve or I don't think I can achieve? So people that don't have that self-belief tend to give up very, very early. So once again, and conversely, those with high levels of self-belief, those that believe that they can achieve the goal that they're set out to achieve, will keep persisting because they know that they can achieve it. They believe it in themselves before they even start. And I'm quite often asked, how do we build self-efficacy? How do we build this self-belief in ourselves? And one of the things is to seek instructional feedback from respected others and then work hard to implement the feedback. So basically being coachable, being able to listen to what our leaders are telling us and the feedback that they're giving, because they're generally more experienced. And so we might be able to bring that into our own life to improve and therefore become more resilient. We can also seek encouragement from those who believe in us. If I'm down on my confidence and I need to understand or I need to build some confidence, and maybe I can go to others that believe in me and ask them, what is it that you see in me? Teach me, tell me what it is that you see, that maybe I can start to introject that into myself and believe myself. And maintaining high levels of physical fitness. This is something that is really important to resilience, actually, which is fitness in itself promotes resilience because we have to push ourselves to get higher results. So the point is that, if I've got to a certain level in fitness, to get more fitness, I need to actually push myself a little bit more. I need to strive a little bit more. So the actual act of improving or increasing fitness is something that creates an innate resilience. And then also, having high levels of fitness, it helps with self-belief that if I'm in a difficult situation, I will be able to push through because I've got the physical capability to do so. But most of all, probably more than anything else, something that builds self-belief is the achievement of small goals. It's not setting this massive and important goal and then heading out and trying to achieve it. It's actually the achievement of very small goals over a period of time. So I achieve a small goal, achieve another small goal, achieve another small goal, achieve another small goal. And by the end of it, my confidence is built over the achievement of a lot of small goals. It's a fact that in Navy SEAL training, well, the one thing that they must do every day when they get out of bed is make their bed. And the idea is that no matter what happens for the rest of the day, I've at least achieved one thing. So on a Navy SEAL training camp, I can tell you right now that making their bed is going to be probably one of the easier things they're going to do in that day, believe me. One of the things that I think is very, very important in resilience that I've been thinking a lot about recently when I work with clients is this concept of realistic optimism. So we can either have a pessimistic view to things, nothing's ever going to work out, I'm no good, what's the point of trying? Or we can have an optimistic viewpoint, which is, hey, I'm going to give this a go. I reckon I can do it. I think that if I try hard enough, I'll be able to achieve what it is I want to achieve. So it's an inclination to expect the best possible outcome in any situation tends to be a characteristic of resilient people, or to focus on the most hopeful aspects of a situation. Optimism is a choice, and I think this is really, really important. This is why one of the reasons why I do believe that resilience is something that we can develop. It's not something that's innate or that we're born with, but it is something we can develop, is the idea that having an optimistic mindset is a choice. And an optimistic thinking style can be trained and improved. So this is really where I believe, this is one of the ones that makes me think very strongly about the fact that resilience is something that we can develop. So I'll give you a bit of an example of optimistic thinking as we can look at this glass here. And of course, the question is this glass half empty or half full? And, most people would think that an optimistic thinker says, well, it's half full, and so that's an optimistic thinker, or a pessimistic thinker will say, well, it's half empty. And I'm going to say that neither one is right. So we have a look at, is this glass half full or is it half empty? And what I'm about to say to you is that it's this glass is completely full. So it's half full of water and it's half full of air. So the optimist might say the glass is always completely full. So just a little trick that we can put in there and say, well, this is what optimistic thinking is all about. The sixth characteristics of resilience is around empathy and contextual intelligence. Once again, contextual intelligence is something I've been thinking a lot about recently and having discussions with people about. But, one of the things we want to look at first is what is empathy? So empathy is your ability, or anyone's ability, to as accurately as possible, to understand another person's feelings and motivations as well as your own. So the difficult thing is people will say to somebody, oh, I understand completely how you feel. That's actually not true. Even though we've been in a very, very similar situation to somebody, we can never fully understand somebody else's experience. It's just we've not had their upbringing, we've not had their previous experiences, and these all add to the way that two different people might experience the same situation. We'll have two people that witness the same traumatic event, and one ends up with post-traumatic stress disorder and the other one can get on with their life. And one example from policing, for example, is that two police officers might go to a crash with little children in it, and the one that has no children might not have too much of a reaction, but the one who has children the same age will have a very traumatic reaction to that very car crash. So empathy is about trying to understand, try to get ourselves into the shoes of the other person as accurately and as closely as we possibly can, understanding that we'll never completely understand what that person is going through or has been through. Not even the best psychologist in the world can say that they completely understand somebody. So that's what empathy is. And the other thing is if we can show some empathy towards ourselves, in difficult situations, if we've failed or we've been rejected or we haven't completed the task as well as we would have liked to have done and we need to bounce back from it, the ability to forgive ourselves or others for that matter. If somebody else in our team has made a mistake, being able to let go of that and tell them that everything's going to be okay is something that can be really, really helpful and be really, really resilient. There's no point getting down on someone that's already made a mistake or ourselves for making a mistake, because we just get so caught up in it and ruminate about the very thing that we've done wrong rather than bouncing back and getting on with something else or working to fix that particular problem. So looking at this again is your ability to move on from what's gone wrong is what's most important. Nelson Mandela has a quote that says, it's not important that you got knocked down. What's important is whether you got back up. And every time you get knocked down, do you get back up again? That's resilience in itself. So, the ability to move on from a mistake or a problem is very important to being resilient. I want to talk a little bit about contextual intelligence now. So contextual intelligence is about the proficiency to adapt knowledge and skills to different situations and environments, whilst understanding the nuances of varying situations, environments, climates, and personalities present. So we all might have similar skills, or we might have a particular skill set, I should say, and then it's an ability to apply that depending on the circumstances or the context in which you find it. So contextual intelligence is about how skilled an individual is at using what they know and making it work from one situation to another, and not just the environment in which it was learned. It might be that, I have skills as a psychologist, and the ability to use those skills or implement those skills and have an impact in an environment will really depend on my ability to adapt those skills to a particular environment. That's contextual intelligence. So how do I implement my skills to a netball team, as a female netball team, as opposed to a male football team, as opposed to a chess team? How do I bring the skills that I have into the context that I'm being asked to consult in? That's contextual intelligence. So having that for resilience is really, really important. I think that striving is also very important. I tend to think of three different stages, and we can ask ourselves which one we're in at any particular time. Am I just surviving, or am I striving to be better, or am I thriving, which is right at the top? I've made it and I'm really kicking goals now. This is where we eventually want to go to. But I think if we've got something we need to bounce back from, we're probably not thriving. We might be just surviving, but we really want to get into that point of striving to bounce back from that particular issue or issue or hole that I find myself in. So striving is a willingness to take on new challenges and opportunities. This is part of being resilient. And then continually working towards our improvement, our self-improvement or team improvement, setting loftier goals and working towards achieving them. And ultimately having a successful mindset and being completely motivated all the time. These are very important aspects of striving to be better, to be a little bit better than I was yesterday, to be a little bit fitter, to push a little bit harder. These are very important aspects of resilience. And coming to our last one, we look at focus. Now, I always say to people when I'm working as a sports psychologist that focus is probably the most important part of sports mental performance, or any performance for that matter, performance environment. Focus is probably the most important thing. And so focus is being able to focus attention, maintain that focus, and not be distracted from priorities. And we can maintain focus by controlling the controllables and letting go of the things that we can't control, only focusing on the things that we can control and have an influence over. So staying in the present moment, having that mindfulness to stay here and be focused on what I'm supposed to be focused on and not being distracted. Focusing on the positives, letting go of the negatives. The positives, the things that have worked before are probably going to work for us again, so let's implement those. Focusing on the process, which is probably the most important thing when it comes to focus in any performance setting, is focusing on the process. What is the process I need to follow to get the success I'm looking for, get the outcome that I'm looking for in any particular environment, and focusing on those processes that are going to get me there is probably the most important thing in performance that there is. And also being flexible in our focus. So at one particular time, it might be most important to focus on A, But as we go along, B might become all of a sudden the most important thing to focus on. So the ability to be flexible, to focus on the right thing at the right time, or the most important thing at the right time, is very, very important in a performance setting, and very important towards resilience. So as we come towards the end of the presentation, I'll show this this frog. Never, ever, 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 ever give up. You know, here he is in a precarious situation, and he's not giving up. He's still going to fight. He's still going to strive. He's still going to have an optimistic outlook to being able to get out of this this very difficult situation. So today we've looked at the difference between resilience and mental toughness, and we've had a very strong focus on what resilience is and the characteristics of resilience. So in this presentation, I don't have anyone sitting in front of me, so I can't do any question and answers. But as always, if anybody has any questions or about this presentation or about anything, please feel free to contact me on any of those contact details there below, and we're more than happy to answer your question. And secondly, once again, if there's anything else that anybody wants a presentation on, please let me know and I'll try to put it together. And anyway, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've thought more about what resilience means to you and your abilities around resilience, and maybe it is something that you can work on during this time of the coronavirus.